All right, in this video, it seems like we're doing a heck of a lot less because there's a lot less in the goals here. So in some ways we are, but what we're going to do is now start to define things related to our building. So the first thing we're going to go over is how to change what are called our parameters regarding our walls and our floors. And this is going to be defining the different layers that make up the walls and floors. So from our AutoCAD three-room shed, I was very strict saying, okay, we've got our siding, our sheathing, our 2x6 stud, and our gypsum wall board when I was putting together the wall and the floor plan. And here in Revit, when we originally made our house, all we did was just put a generic 8-inch wall on the outside and a generic 5-inch wall on the inside. So what we're going to do is change some of those parameters with it so we can add those definitions into the building itself. We're going to also then change some of the relationships between the floors. And then we're also going to add a foundation and a deck. And I believe too, I had a staircase here. Let me look at my thing. Nope, I still haven't added a staircase yet. Okay, so at some point we're going to add a staircase. When? I don't know. I think maybe part 3. We'll find out. So this is just a little preview of what kind of the Cardinal house looks like so far within this step. So what I'm going to do now is just close out of this and open up my prep from the video. So here is my file from where we left off with our video. So again, we just have our building here without anything actually defined in it. And we've got our floor. So what we could have done is before making any of our walls or placing any of our walls, we could have made our own custom wall and plopped it in here and then just use that. However, I didn't want that to be kind of our first introduction to Revit because it is a little bit of a cumbersome task and it may seem more complicated than it is. So what we're actually going to do is just edit what we already have as our generic 8-inch wall and edit our 5-inch wall. And by just editing these walls alone, we can then use them. If I edit this 8-inch wall, it's going to update any other one that shares that same wall type or that same family. So I could do this first step from either this 3D view or from my level 2 view. So again, you switch your views by clicking or double clicking down here, or I can go into this 3D section and double click on 3D view, but I prefer getting to the 3D view through this little shortcut button. And I'm just going to click on one of my exterior walls and I'm going to go into edit type here. So I first have to select the wall and then I can edit its type. When this little menu pops up, typically what we would want to do is duplicate this wall to then make a new one. But since I want to update all of these generic walls into the same one, what I'm just going to do is rename it and I'm just going to call it exterior wall. So that way later on, if I have to pick it out from a list, I know what it is. And then what I want to do is edit its structure. So I'm going to click here on edit. And what this is bringing up is all of the different layers that are sitting within my wall structure. The outside is at the top, the inside is at the bottom. We're going to make this wall out of pretty much the same thing that our 3-room shed from AutoCAD was. So currently we just have one generic material in here. Nothing is defined yet other than the fact that it's 8 inches. So I'm going to add in 3 additional layers by just clicking on insert. So again, there's nothing defined yet regarding these, but that's what we'll go through. And I'm going to move 2 of these layers up above the core boundary. So I'm just going to click on up. I'll click on this next one and I'll say up. So in my line 1, I've got something. Line 2, I've got something. Line 3 is a core boundary. Line 4, I have something. And then I'm going to take this one in line 5 and I'm going to move it down. So that way, in total, I have 6 lines and they're all structured like so. Since this is going to be my outside, for my line 1 or row 1, I'm going to redefine its function as a finish. For some reason, I always do my exterior as finish 1 and my interior as finish 2. I don't know why. My row 2, I'm going to redefine its function as a substrate. Line 3, I'm going to just leave alone. I can't change anything about this. Line 4, I'm going to leave as a structure. And line 6, I'm going to make a finish 2. Because what's going to happen is this is going to be our clapboard siding. This is going to be our sheathing. This is going to be our wall stud. And then this is going to be our drywall on the inside. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to change their materials. And after I even just change this first one's material, we can even look at just what happens up here when it comes to the R value and the thermal mass of the wall that's being calculated. So to change the finish material, I'm going to click on where it says by category, and then this little ellipses button pops up, and I'm going to click on that. This opens up the material browser, which by default is probably for you guys going to look sort of like this. So or more so like that, actually. So two things that I immediately do is I always open the material editor just in case I want to make some changes. And I also open up the material library. So up here are all of the materials currently loaded into this project. And what's going to happen is if we try to search for something that doesn't exist, we might have to load it in from the entire material library. So what's in down here is every material that AutoCAD or Autodesk has in their storage, and this is just everything in our current project. So I'm going to search for siding, and we'll see that there were no materials in this document about siding, but there is this one here for siding clapboard, which is exactly what I want to use in this project. So to load it in, again, if you don't open up the material library by clicking on that arrow, you won't see it. But to load it in, I'm just going to click on this little add to document, and that added it here. And then a couple other things I like to do is add in a surface pattern in this case. So if we look at our house, it has horizontal siding to it. And it's honestly probably even vinyl, but we'll do clapboard because it'll just look a little better. Is I'm going to update the pattern for the surface by just clicking on it here. And I'm just going to find horizontal stripes. Don't know if I want to do large or small. I'll do just regular horizontal. And then I could even change a background color if I want, but I'll just leave the background pattern and color alone. The cut pattern this is what will show up when it's in section. So some materials will already have stuff predefined in here. In the case of our siding, we're going to leave it completely alone. And then the other thing I'm going to do in this scenario is I'm going to go into this appearance tab here. And I'm actually going to update how this picture is going to look on my actual building. So what I'm going to do in this scenario is I'm going to tint it by checking off tint. And then I'm going to change its color to be sort of that teal color that this image has, because I want to try to replicate the actual building as much as possible. If you want to leave yours as tan, that's totally cool. If you want to make yours a slightly different color than this teal, because this teal isn't super appealing, maybe I'll make it a little darker. Then you can do that as well. But I'm just going to try to replicate it as much as possible. Tint is going to work in this scenario because the image is so light. If you have a darker image, then tint usually doesn't work too well with it. So you may want to pick a different material or a different picture. I'm going to go back in the graphics tab. And a lot of times what I do with materials is I check off this use render appearance, which what that does is it takes the closest color it can find from this picture. Now in this scenario, that wouldn't work too well purely because we want it to be that teal. So instead what I'm going to do is uncheck that, and I'm going to click on this color, and I'm just going to define the color that I want it to be. So I'll have it be this fluorescent teal, and it'll have horizontal stripes on it. So I'm just going to click OK. And then I'm going to define a thickness of our siding. So I'm going to make my siding 3/4 of an inch, which I could type in here a couple of ways. What I usually do is just only highlight the inch amount and then put my inch in. So I said that this is made out of clapboard siding. It's 3/4 of an inch thick, And we can see that it's calculating an R value based on the physical properties it knows about clapboard siding. Within my next layer, or my next row, this is going to be my plywood. So again, I'm just going to click on the material. I'm going to click on where that little ellipses pops up. I can drag this corner just to make it a little larger. And I'm going to search for plywood, which plywood sheathing is already loaded into our project. It doesn't really matter too much if I use render appearance here, since this is a layer inside of our wall. What I do want to do is change the cut pattern to have a pattern of that plywood. So I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find the plywood pattern. And I usually also change the color of these to usually be a little bit gray, so that way when I do something like a detailed wall section, it's not super duper bold or in your face, something like that. So that way it will have a pattern automatically applied when I make a section cut. And this is going to have a thickness of 0.5. And we can see again that it's also updating our overall wall thickness and our R value as I make this. Within row 4 for the structure, I'm going to click on, so again, first you have to click on where it says by category, and then you click on this ellipses, and I'm going to give it a material of softwood and lumber. And I can leave all of this alone. I don't have to check off use render appearance. It's already defining it with a color, but that's not going to be too much of a important thing to me. And for my material here, I'm going to make it 5.5 inches. What you're going to run into is if you delete all of the text and you just write 5.5, which I accidentally put a slash in there, and hit enter, it's going to read that as 5.5 feet. Revit is always thinking feet. It's never thinking inches. So what you could do is 0 space 5.5, and it'll read that as 5.5 inches. But if you just type in a number as is, without anything else attached to it, it's going to think feet. Or I could type it like this, and then put a quotation mark for inches. It'll read that as 5.5 inches as well. And for our last one on the inside, I'm going to go into this material. I'm going to give it a material of gypsum wallboard, which we can see here that it already is putting a pattern of sand in there for us. So it's already hatching it because it knows that that's what it would do. What I'm going to do is click here and just redefine that again as like a gray. I just prefer it that way. And in this case too, I am going to check off use render appearance, which will just make it, when I'm in this conceptual mode, it's going to give it a little color cue. And I find that just particularly helpful to know that I have applied materials to a specific area. So this isn't required, it's just something I like. And I'll click on OK. And I'll come here and I'm going to change its thickness to 1/2 inch. So we can see here we now have our full R value of this wall, and we also have a total thickness of 7.25 inch. The reason why I want this softwood, just my lumber, in this core boundary is because it's going to help later on when I redefine my floors, as well as then place some dimensions to my building, as I can have it go to the core, so I can just have the building automatically place dimensions to the dimension to the studs rather than dimension to the overall outside. Then I'm going to click on OK once I have all of these defined. So finish, substrate, structure, finish, clapboard, plywood, softwood, gypsum, and these amounts. And Revit's just updating my model. And once I hit apply here, I can see then that update being made to my model out here. Even if I hit OK without hitting apply, I'd still see those updates happen. The reason I can see it in color is because down here in my 3D mode, I'm set to consistent colors. If I was in hidden line, it's still just only going to show up black and white. So that's one of the reasons why I like consistent colors. We're going to do a similar process for our interior walls. So I'm just going to click on one of these generic 5-inch walls, edit type. I'm going to rename it to be called interior wall. And then I'm going to go into edit its structure. I'm going to insert in 2 additional layers and move one of them up, move another one of them down. And for their functions, I'm going to change this top one to be finish, and I'll change the bottom one to be finish. From what I understand, there's no difference between finish 1 and 2, but I could be absolutely incorrect about that. So if I am, I apologize. And then I'm going to change their materials. So I'm just going to click on this finish material to be gypsum here. And it's going to remember that all of these settings I had applied for gypsum, so I don't have to redefine any of these things. And a thickness of 1/2. For my structure, I'm going to make this one softwood lumber. Click OK. And I'm going to give my interior stud a thickness of 3.5 inches because it's going to be a 2x4. And then for my finish on the other side, I'm going to make this one also gypsum wallboard with a thickness of 1/2 inch. So I have 1/2 inch, 2x4, 1/2 inch, my total thickness, my total R value, all of that's getting created and adjusted, which can then be used by maybe like if I had someone in the office who's doing only just sustainability insights, they then can get that information and make some more accurate choices and estimates. So I'm going to click on OK, and I'll click on OK. And now we can see too that all of my interior walls are defined. My first floor too, we can see some of the first wall in this hole here for the staircase. Because these were all just originally the generic 5-inch wall, all I did was just redefine its name and its parameters, and it changed all of the walls associated with that family. If I decided that I wanted this wall to be a little different, I can just come here and I can switch it to be a generic brick, and now this wall is generic brick. So I can change things up as I make them. But I do want to keep it as that interior wall that I made. If any of your walls are inside out, so right now this exterior wall, I just made it inside out. So my siding is on the inside. Just click on it and hit the space bar, and then you can flip that wall around. I'll do the same, or I'll do a similar thing with my floor. So I want to redefine my floor. So if I click on my floor's edge, which is a little easier to do in the 3D view, you can kind of hover over it and find the floor to click on. Or if you're in your level 2 floor plan, what you can do is click and drag across selection. And then filter out of your selection. Oh, because I'm in the ceiling plan. I was like, why is my floor not showing up? Sometimes I like to close this out so that way I don't accidentally click in it. There we go. Here's my level 2 floor. So I'm just going to click and drag so I select a bunch of stuff. So right now I have 5 things selected. I have my floor, I have this window, I have this wall, and the CAD file. I'm just going to come up here to filter, and I'm going to say get rid of everything out of my selection except the floor. And now I only have the floor. And what I can do is come here and I can just change it to a different type. And some of them are already predefined here. So we have like a wood joist that's a 2x10 with ceramic tile, one that has wood flooring, and then one that has carpeting. So I'm just going to make my upstairs have carpeting. And when we go into the 3D view, you'll see that it's a beautiful, beautiful, wonderful shade of brown. And I'm going to change my first floor. So again, in this case, I can just click on it here in the 3D view. I'm going to change my first floor to just have wood finish across the entire building. And if we can sort of see it through the window, one trick too that's kind of nice in the 3D view here is when your properties bar is just the 3D view, so you've hit escape a bunch of times, you don't have anything clicked. If you scroll down in this menu, within this extent, you can turn on a section box. And what the section box allows you to do is I can grab this box and I can pull it in to just cut like parts of my building out. So this is particularly helpful if I want to look at like the first floor without the second floor being in the way. I can drag this up and down so that way I can look at the first floor. Or again, if I want to cut parts of that out. So that can be really helpful and dandy. Another thing we could do too is hide particular things. So if I click on this wall here, I can come down to these glasses and I can say temporarily hide this element, which makes that wall go away for a moment, but not get rid of it. Or I could also like click on these windows, go to these glasses, and I could say hide this category, which would make all windows go away. So element gets rid of just the one thing, category gets rid of all of them. And then if I want everything back, I just click on these glasses and I say reset, and then everything comes back. So just another way we can work with things. One thing's with the floors. So if I go to my level 1 floor plan, one thing that Revit does with floors that I particularly do not like is it puts a hatch pattern in on the floor. In my opinion, this is just really busy in my drawing and makes it harder to focus in on the actual stuff I need to focus. So what I like to do in sets of documents is I like to go into my visibility and graphics for the floor plan, and I'm just going to edit the visibility. I'm going to scroll down to floors, and when I see the floor pattern, I'm going to click on override, and I'm just going to say don't make it visible. And then if I hit apply, we can see that the floor pattern went away. It's not gone. My floors still exist. My floor is still made of not my plywood, my like oak flooring or whatever I have there, but it's just not visible anymore in the level 1 floor plan, which I kind of just prefer. So I'll go into the level 2 floor plan and I'll do the same thing. So I just double click down here, or I could have clicked on it up here in my tabs. I'm going to go into my visibility. I'm going to scroll down to floors, pattern, override, just get rid of it. For me, it's just having little dots and lines there takes away from the walls and the doors, and so I really dislike them. Just sort of my personal preference. We also need to then add in a floor for our front deck and our back deck. So in here, if I click on my light bulb, just because I have those elements hidden, I hid them the last time. We've got our little front deck and we've got our back porch of sorts. So we're going to add a floor in. So I'm going to go to my level 1 floor plan, double clicked on it. I'm going to add in a floor. What we can do beforehand is we can also define our floor before we ever make one. I just did generic ones because I didn't want to do too much too soon. But we can also say, I'm just going to do this concrete on metal deck, 3-inch concrete on metal deck. Instead of using the pick wall tool, what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to just make a rectangle, and I'm just going to do it from this corner here to this corner here, because that's where our floor, or rather our front porch, sits. What I'm curious about is if I make another one back here in this same tool, is it going to let me? My assumption is it won't. My assumption is I'd have to click on finish and then make a second one here, but I'm going to try it just to see. I'm curious. So if I go from that corner, another rectangle, to this corner, since these are 2 separate loops, it did work. Cool. So I can actually make these 2 the same since they're both made out of decks. I figured it was going to make me end the tool, come back into the tool, and make another floor here, but that's kind of cool. So if we look at everything 3D now, and I get myself out of the hidden mode, I now just have a slab of concrete in front of my house and a slab on the back of it. Doesn't really have like a lifted up porch or a lifted up deck. We could make it that way if we wanted to, but I'll just leave it as a slab on grade. Then the next thing we're going to do is put in, let me get back into Revit, is put in our roofs. So we have actually 3 different roof systems that we're going to have to create. So we have our just plain gable here. It's got a little bit of an overhang, and we also look at the AutoCAD drawing just to make sure we have the slope correct. Then we just have kind of a shed style roof or just one single slope sitting here on the deck, and we could do that 2 different ways. And then we have another little bit here that's just giving us some shading on these southern windows here. So that way we can kind of protect sunlight from getting in there in like the warm summer months. So if I look at the AutoCAD file, so let me just open it up. Just because we sort of got rid of this, ignore, when we loaded in our project. Because again, this has our floor plan of everything. It has our second floor. This is our foundation plan, which we'll also add one of those in today. And then here is our roof plan. So what this is telling me is pretty straightforward of where my overhang is. I have a 2-foot overhang on each side of this building. And then I also have a slope of 812 going this way and this way. There is no slope on this face of the building because that's what's going to make it into a gable. If I also had a slope coming in this way and a slope coming in this way, then it would be a hip style roof. So we want to make a gable. And then I also have a little, this has a slope of 4/12. And it doesn't say, let me double check because maybe it will say here what my slope is for this little overhang bit. So it's not telling me what this slope is. Oh, here it is. So this also has an 8/12 slope. Okay. So that way I can just try to make it match as much as possible. And if it doesn't match exactly, it'll be okay. So in Revit, I like to do my roofs and things like that in floor plans rather than 3D views, but I'll also show you how you could do it in a 3-dimensional view. What I'm going to do is go to my level 2 plan. So I just double clicked here. This kind of brownish rectangle, this is going to be what we use for our roof. And for this gable style, I'm going to do it as a roof by footprint, which is what's by default. If you click on the little arrow, we can see that there are a couple of different options here for our roof. But I'm just going to do the plain roof by footprint. And what I'm going to do is instead of drawing in boundary lines, I'm just going to say I want to pick lines. I'm going to hover over this one and I'm going to hit tab so it will select the chain and then I'll click on it. At this point, if I just say, okay, make a roof, I'll say don't attach that please, I'm going to run into 2 problems. One, my roof's sitting inside my house. That's a little bit of a big problem because I have it sitting on level 2. Easy fix is I could come here and say, put it on the roof, please. And my section box is cutting off part of it. So, whoop, I'll bring that up. So I fixed my problem of the fact that my roof was sitting inside my floor. But my problem now is that my roof is a hip style and I want a gable. So I'm going to delete it and just redraw it to show you how like you could do this better. Is I'm going to go into my level 2 floor plan. When I make my roof, I'm going to pay attention to my base level so that way I put it on the roof beforehand. But again, if you don't, you could fix it. I'm going to go into pick line. I'll hover over, hit tab, and then click. What these little triangles are referring to is it's saying that slope is being defined on this one, this one, this one, and this one. So that's why it made that hip style roof. So what I want to do is get rid of slope on, get rid of the slope on this side and this side. So after I've selected those 4, I'm going to hit escape a bunch of times. I'm going to click on this line here and I'm just going to uncheck define slope. I could undefine it here, or I could undefine it here. So I'm just going to click on those two. So those two no longer have slope. If I wanted to change the slope of this, I could redefine it here or here. So I'm just going to change this to be 8 inches over 12. And I'm going to change this one to be 8 inches over 12. Another way I could make my roof is I could do it based off of walls rather than using this box here. So I could say just do it based off of walls, and I could predefine an overhang amount. So I could say an overhang of 2 feet, and then I can click, 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 and it'll define it for me. I'm going to just select those two at the same time. So that's why I just did a click and drag through that and say I don't want those sloped. Click and drag through those and say give me a slope of 8 over 12. And then I'll say, let me just make sure that, okay, good, I've got my base level set to roof. I'll click OK, and I'll look at it 3-dimensionally, and now I have just this generic roof of a gable style with a 2-foot overhang. There is hopefully a problem that you guys are seeing here in the fact that there's a big old hole here. So all I'm going to do is just hover over one of these exterior walls and hit tab so I get the chain and select them. And then I'm going to say attach top to base, and I'll click on the roof. And what's useful about that is then if I decide to change this slope, the walls are going to change with it. So let me just Control Z to undo that because I don't want to change the slope. What I do want to change is this from a generic 12-inch roof. So I'm just going to click on the roof itself and come over here, and I'm going to change it to this wood rafter 8-inch asphalt shingle. This is close enough to what I want it to be. And that way it now has all of those layers defined. So if I go into edit type here and I look at the structure, what it's doing in this pre-made one is it's already saying that it's made out of shingle and that we have plywood and that we have our wood rafters with bad insulation. So it's already predefining a lot of the building in there, which is pretty nice. For my roof here, that's sloping here, what I'm going to do is, do I want to do it by extrusion? Nah, maybe. Well, I'm trying to think what I did in the preview thing if I did it by extrusion. I know I did this one by extrusion. So we'll do this one by extrusion as well. Why not? So what I'm going to do is I like to do roofs by extrusions in the 3D view, and I'm actually going to bring those drawings, those DWG files back. So I'm going to, in my case, I'm going to click on this little light bulb. I'm just going to click on this drawing here, and I'm going to say unhide, and then reveal it. So that way it just brings this drawing back in, so that way I have it just as a reference. And I'm going to go into my roof by clicking on this here, and I'm going to say roof by extrusion. It's asking me to pick a work plane, and I'm going to pick this wall here, so that way I can just kind of draw my slope here. And I'll say okay, and I'm going to select this wall. The level, I'm not going to worry about too much, so I'll just leave my level set as roof, and I'll click OK. And what I'm going to do is put myself into the front view, or just put myself completely parallel with this. And I'm going to draw a line straight up. I need to make sure I'm getting my slope as 4 feet. Because I want it here. In reality, I also could just slope it so that as long as it's not sitting in front of those windows. Because I want a 4'12" slope, and I can't necessarily define a slope like that in an extrusion, which I definitely didn't do when I made my original one. So yeah, instead, let's just do it that way. So what I'm going to do is just draw a line from this endpoint and just make it so that it's going to sit on this wall. And as long as it's underneath my window, I'll be in a good spot and I'll be happy. So once I just have that line there, I'm going to click on the green check. I could also beforehand come here and switch it to that wood rafter, hit my green check. And what that has done is it's made my roof for me going from edge to edge. I want to double check in the picture if there's any overhang, which it looks like there's no overhang on these sides. So I'm actually then good to go in the case of this roof here. For my roof that's on this side here, it looks like it starts here and then it's going to go up on that 8-12. So I'm going to do another, I'll actually do this one as a roof by footprint just to kind of show you how you could do this same thing, but as a footprint. So I'm going to go on to level 2. And we can even see here that my roof shows up in my level 2 floor plan. So I can see that little bit of roof deck there. I'm going to do a roof by footprint. And I'm going to make it a box. Does this one have an overhang? Nope, it also sits flush. Okay. So I'm going to make a rectangle from this corner to this corner. And all I'm going to do is get rid of the slope on all 3 of these sides. So that's why I'm just clicking over here and just dragging to do a quick cross selection. And I'll say get rid of the slope on all 3 of those. But on this side, give it a slope of 8/12. And I'll leave the level as level 2 on this case because it'll be fine on level 2. And then I'll go to my 3D view. And now I have my little roof bit there. So that is how I can add roofs. Some roofs get a little more tricky and a little more interesting. So a lot of times if you want to do something really weird or funky with a roof, you want to do a roof by extrusion. Or oftentimes what I'll do is I'll use something called a mass, and I might mass something out as a really weird shape. And then I can make a roof based off of the face from that mass. So I want to see if this will give us, there we go. If I wanted to do something really intricate and really weird that I can't figure out how to map it out, I can do it through a roof by face once I have a mass made. We can also add in things like our soffit and our fascia in here by clicking on our particular lines. Must be in a closed loop. And what that has done is it's just added in a little bit of a soffit down there. And then I can also close this gap up here using my fascia tools and my gutter tools, but I kind of just will often leave them as just these empty masses for now. Okay, then let me just double check. My last thing that we're going to do today in this video is we are going to add in our foundation to our building. So we're going to need to add in another level to make our foundation. So that way we have a bottom part of it. And then we will put our foundation and footing in. So in order to add a level, I'm just going to go to any one of these elevations. It does not matter. This one seems as good as any. And what I'm going to do is use my level tools to add a level. And I'm just going to make a level that's underneath here. So I just clicked here to start it, click here to end it. For its name, I'm going to name it Foundation. And again, it's going to prompt me, do I want to rename it over here? Which I'll say sure. For its height, let's see if they give us, they most likely in our sections, they give us a couple of different foundation types. But my assumption is they're not going to give us anything defined with it, purely because the fact that our footing is going to have to go down to a different level depending on where exactly this house is being built, because we're going to have various frost lines and we're going to have various codes that we're going to have to follow. So yeah, they don't give us anything related to height within here. We'll just put our footing at the same height that the 3-room shed was, which I believe was -3 space 4 was how far down the top of the footing sat. And then I'm going to go into my foundation floor plan that's here by double clicking on it. And what we're seeing, unfortunately, is all of the floor plan above because of how the cuts are defined in here and where our foundation sits. So if I had my foundation sitting a lot lower, I wouldn't have to worry about that. But in this case, I am going to have to worry about it and just change a little feature within this particular floor plan. So I'm going to scroll down in my visibilities, and I'm going to go to my extents, and I'm going to click on my view range. So I want the top of my view range to be sitting at 0. I'm trying to think a little bit, actually. This, we actually might just leave it set at, let's actually put it back on that 7'6" and see what happens. I know I want to change my cut plane to be around like 2 foot instead of 4 foot. If I hit apply, we can see then that the actual floor plan itself went away. However, the windows are still here. So let's change my top again to be like 2 foot with a cut plane of 1. And there we go. Okay, good. Everything's gone. And then we can leave the rest of this alone. So top I set to 2 foot, cut plane I set to 1 foot, and then I'll click apply. And okay. However, we still need some of the floor plan in order to figure out where our foundation walls are going to go. So what I'm going to do next is just turn my underlay on. So I'm going to scroll up in here and I'm going to change my underlay from none to level 1. And it's just going to put the level 1 plan sitting in here. So that way I can at least see it and reference it. And what I'm going to do next is create a wall. But for my wall type, I'm going to scroll up and I'm going to use this generic 8-inch masonry wall because this is going to make it 8-inch CMUs, which will be wonderful. For my base constraint, I'm going to have it as foundation. For my top constraint, I want it to set up to level 1. And I can then just trace around. And we can see too that it's already adding in hatch patterns for us because it knows what the CMU hatch is going to need to be. So I just traced around all of the outside and we can go into my 3D view to kind of just look at then how that foundation looks like. And I'll go back into the foundation floor plan. And since now I've traced out what I needed, I can come here and I can turn my underlay back off to none. So now it's just only showing me my foundation walls. I also need to add a footing to this foundation. So what I'm going to do is go into my structure tab and I'm going to create a foundation wall, which is going to put a footing underneath the CMU. So I'm going to do that. What I'm also going to do is edit the type of this bearing footing. And I'm going to duplicate it first. And I'm going to call this one, I'm just going to call it 24-inch by 12-inch. So this is going to make it 2 foot wide, 12 foot tall. And I'm going to change its width to be 2 foot. So this is where like you can really customize things to be anything you want. It's already going to make it cast in place concrete, which will be nice because it will also hatch it for us correctly and everything. And then I'm just going to click on the walls I want to apply it to. And we can see here that I got a warning, not an error, but a warning. When these pop up, please read them. A lot of times students just ignore what's saying here. So what it's saying is none of the created elements are visible in the floor plan foundation, which means it made it, we just can't see it at the moment. You may want to change its visibility settings in the plan region. So what's happening when I click and these warnings pop up is it's making footings. It made footings on all 4 of those walls. If I go into my 3D view, sure, I'd like to save my project, Revit. Thanks for reminding me. I go into my 3D view and I have my section cut in the way. It put a footing on there. It's just that I can't see it in the foundation. So when those warnings pop up, please read them, especially when we do a ceiling. You'll notice that a lot of times you guys ignore that and it's telling you some pretty important stuff. So what I need to do is edit my view parameters. So again, I'm going to scroll down here within my view range and I'm going to edit it so that the bottom is sitting, I think I want like -1 foot. I'll try. Nope. Let me try this view depth also at -1. There we go. So if I change these two, and sometimes it's a game of playing around with these numbers to figure out exactly what you want, I can see my footing here. If I want to update anything with the lines, so for instance, if I want these lines to be dashed instead of solid, I can actually change anything related to line work in the modify menu. So if I click on this wall here or this footing here, and I come up to this line work option, it's doing lines based on the categories of them. But if I actually say here that I want, in this case, if I put demolished, it'll make it dashed. And I just click on this, it's just going to dash these lines for me. So I can just update how lines appear in a drawing if I want to, which is pretty cool and dandy of it. So that way I can update those to be dashed lines so they can be a little bit more accurate when I'm looking at something like a foundation plan. And so with that, I now have my building pretty much ready to go, or I have a heck of a lot more of it done. I've got my roof, I've got my walls, I've got a foundation, and I've got a floor. In our next video, so let me just save this again and close out of all of these. In our next video, we are going to add in a site to our building. So we're going to add land and a couple extra things. And no stairs just yet. I think I do the stairs and the components. But we'll also then start adding in stairs, components, ceilings, and we'll get our building pretty much ready to go. When it comes to sites, there's a few different ways that we can operate with those. So I'll make sure to show those in the next video, and I'll see you then.